Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of February of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. During the previous video we were talking a lot about Zelensky. During the previous several days he was interviewed by the CNN. Zelensky was talking a lot. Zelensky was talking about the losses of the armed forces of Ukraine since the beginning of the special military operation, and obviously Zelensky was manipulating with numbers by saying that Ukrainians lost just 45,100 people dead since the beginning of the operation. Zelensky was talking about nuclear weapons. He stated that he wants nuclear weapons and missiles as a compensation for Ukraine not being accepted into NATO. Also, he was talking about missiles, about some restrictions and many other things. And you know that the Russians were listening to Zelensky carefully, and today they gave us their statements and their opinion regarding Zelensky's words and his interview in CNN. What the Russians stated, and the Russians report more precisely, Kremlin more precisely, Peskov, the press secretary of Vladimir Putin, he said that Russia is ready for negotiations with Zelensky even though he is illegitimate. This is a very important statement, and we need to understand that there is nothing new in this statement. I'll remind you that several days ago Putin was interviewed by his Russian, let's say, media, and he was talking about the legitimation of Zelensky himself. And if you remember, Putin said that Russia doesn't care whether Zelensky is going to participate in the negotiation process or not. The Russians don't mind if Zelensky will take part in this process, if he will discuss the main things. Russia most likely even doesn't mind if Zelensky come to Kremlin, take a visit to have a meeting with Putin and sign some agreements with him. Russia don't care about this. The most important question for Russia is who is going to sign any agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And for Putin, for Russia, it is very important that Zelensky is not going to be a person who will sign any peace agreement or truce with Russia, because according to Russia, he is illegitimate. He can take part in the negotiation process, but he can't sign anything. And this exactly what was stated today by Kremlin. So just keep this information in your minds. As for the United States of America, we see that as for now they're taking a very close look at this situation, trying to understand what to do next, because Trump understands that either the Russians or the Ukrainians, either Putin or Zelensky are trying to play with the United States of America. And as for now, Trump doesn't understand whom he should press and whom he should give more benefits. For example, today, according to NBC, Trump administration split over Ukraine conflict resolution. U.S. National Security Advisor and Special Envoy Keith Kellogg believed that U.S. should increase pressure on Russia, and other U.S. administration officials believe aid to Ukraine should be cut in order to resolve the conflict as soon as possible. So, as you can see, Trump needs to make very interesting decision, very important decision. But as I understand, and I will make my own projection, I believe that Trump will increase pressure on Russia. He will most likely lift some sanctions, and most likely United States of America will lift long-range missile strikes deep inside the territory of Russia, and he will provide more weapons. So from the business perspective, I believe that the United States of America will try to earn as much as possible money from this conflict, and the only way how US can earn money is to allow everything to do everything they want and everything they can. And because anyway they understand that Russians will start using dollars, and Ukraine will start buying weapons from US, and obviously it will bring more benefits. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. And the most important updates are coming from several directions. And first, let's discuss the situation in the Sumy area. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians carried out another Iskander strike. I'll remind that since the beginning of February, there were at least 3 strikes in the Sumy region. The Ukrainians suffered significant losses. This video with another Iskander strike is very important, but it's more important when talking about different updates from this territory. And the most important thing I would like to point your attention is the number numbers of updates we got during the previous day. As you can see, and all these numbers, all these updates are telling us one thing: the Russians intensify their activities, and most likely they're about to begin another wave of offensive operation in this area. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of videos of how the Russians were bombing, how the Russians were attacking Ukraine positions, FPV drones. It looks like the Russians are preparing the positions they're planning to assault in the very near future. As you can see, there is a very huge concentration of icons in the vicinity of Miropolye. This is very important direction because I'll remind you that one of the roads that Ukrainians use to supply and support their force in Suja is already under complete Russian fire control. We're talking about N07 road. And there is another road that goes from the city of Sumy through the village of Magritsa in the direction of N07 road. And the Russians need to reduce their distance towards this road if they want to cut this road as well. And most likely these artillery strikes have the purpose to prepare the foothold before the Russian advance in this direction. If the armored forces of Russian Federation are able to take under control this settlement, then the Russians will be able to shorten the distance till almost 8 kilometers, which means that there's going to be already FPV drone control, artillery control, and different types of weapon control. As for this Suja direction itself, the main updates and the most important, the biggest number of updates are coming from the territory of Cherkasskaya Porечная. This very important settlement, I'll remind you that this settlement is neighboring to the settlement of Russkaya Porечная. And if you remember, during the previous weeks, the Russians were investigating dozens of war crimes that were committed by the Ukrainians on the territory of this settlement. Most likely the Russians finished the investigation process. They managed to collect necessary evidences, and now they're about to begin another attack in the direction of the settlement of Cherkasskaya Porечная, where most likely the Russians will face the same situation. Committed crimes, war crimes carried out by the Ukrainian sources. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the north in Kupiansk direction. Today we got lots of very interesting updates. The most important is the report that was published by the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. Today the Russian resources stated that as a result of successful actions, units of the Group of Forces West managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Novomlinsk. So this is the third settlement the Russians managed to take under complete control, and now we can say that the Russians have a very powerful stronghold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Oskil. Also, I would like to point your attention to several FPV drone strikes that already took place not on the territory that is under Russian control, but the Russians moved their focus much further in the western direction. So, for example, in this video we can see how the Russians managed to discover a Ukrainian vehicle and destroyed this vehicle as a result of FPV drone attack. Another important video took place deep inside the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Novovasilievka. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing Russians using artillery systems. The Russians managed to discover this artillery system, and then as a result of Lancet strike, this artillery system was destroyed. So the Russians continued the preparation of this foothold before the beginning of a full-scale offensive operation. I'll remind you that most likely during the next 2-3 weeks the Russians will cross the river of Oskil, and they will begin advancing in the northwestern direction with the purpose to attack Ukrainians in the area of Volchansk from behind. Another important updates came today from the settlement of Topoli. First, the pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions to cross the river and to semi-encircle the settlement of Topoli. Later, the neutral resources confirmed this situation, this information, and neutral resources reported that the Russians attacked not just from the area of the river of Oskil, but the Russians were trying to attack Ukrainian positions from the border. So let's return back to map. Once again, the Russians were attacking using these routes of attack. This is another way where the Russians were attacking, and according to neutral mappers, the Russians were trying to break through the border and to attack the settlement from the north. As for now, the northern attack was repelled by the Ukrainian side, but as for the southern, most likely the Russians managed to improve their positions and to dig in deeper. But the most important that if the Russians started, most likely they would finish this operation, and if this information is correct, during the next several days, the territory that is located inside of this red line would be captured by the Russians, and then the Russians will begin advancing in the southwestern direction with the purpose to attack in the direction of Katerinovka and to outflank the Ukrainian strongholds that goes between the settlement of Grigorovka and Volchansk itself. So I believe that today, on the 5th of February, the Russians began maybe northeastern Kharkiv offensive operation. And the main purpose of this offensive operation is to take everything under control, let's say between to the north of the line between the water reservoir and the city of and town of Dvorichna itself. So everything to the north of this red line, most likely the Russians will try to take under control during the next several weeks. Now let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupinsk direction. Very important updates are coming from the city of Izium. I reminded that this small town basically was under Russian control in 2022, but as a result of Ukraine Kharkiv counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over this settlement. During the previous 48 hours, the Russians attacked the city or the town with Iskander, and as a result of attack, one building was destroyed. The sources are saying that the Ukrainians were using this building as a temporary deployment point, and now we see that the building was completely destroyed, and this happened while the Russians are trying to advance in the southern Kupinsk direction. The main activities were taking place in the line between Kolodezi and Yampolovka. As for Kolodezi, the Russians were actively withdrawing and attacking Ukraine units there, but as you can see, without any changes on the ground. As for the Sivas direction, we can see the same story. The Russians were bombing this direction without any changes on the ground. Now let's discuss the situation in the city of Chasavyar. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians didn't improve their positions, but the most important is that during the previous 24 hours, the Russians carried out several Iskander strikes or missile strikes in the area of the city of Kramatorsk and the town of Drushkovka. Several warehouses and ammo depots were destroyed, most likely those warehouses and ammo depots that Ukrainians were using to supply their forces in the rest of the city of Chasavyar. Anyway, despite the fact that there were no changes on the ground, we believe and we understand that most likely it's maybe up to 1 month left before the Russians are able to take under control the city of Chasavyar and to begin offensive operation in the direction of Konstantinovka. As for the city of Terez, during the previous 24 hours, we had lots of updates. Mainly, we got updates of how the Russians were actively withdrawing and attacking the Ukrainian vehicles in the fields, Ukrainian positions. Most likely, this is something like preparation before another ground operation, another full-scale offensive in the direction of the same city, the city of Konstantinovka. If we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of February, we're going to receive lots of updates exactly in this area, and this tells us that this is exactly the way and the roads that the Russians are planning to use to attack. The Russians will attack in the direction of Katerinovka and Kleban-Bytskaya water reservoir. The Russians will attack in the direction of Nilipovka. Most likely, the Russians will try to cross Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and they will attack Bilogora, they will attack Delievka, so they will attack this pocket with the purpose to maintain the lines and to take everything under control that lays to the south between the Kleban-Bytskaya водохранилище and the city of Chasavyar. This will allow the Russians to semi-encircle the city of Konstantinovka from the south, southeast, from the east, and from the northeast. Another important thing, another important updates are coming from the territory of the settlement of Vozdvizhenka. Today, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the units of the Group of Forces Center managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Baranovka. Based on this report, we have adjusted the map. Let's take a look at how the map was changing. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 4th of February, and this is the situation by the end of the 5th of February. So this is another route of attack, and the main purpose of the Russians is to get as close as possible to the city of Konstantinovka from the south west. If the Russians are able to finish all these 3 offensive operations successfully, then most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from the settlement of Konstantinovka without showing any resistance, because if Ukrainian defense lines were prepared, let's say between Chasavyar and Konstantinovka, then the Ukrainians will be able to slow the Russians down. I'm not sure that Ukrainians managed to prepare fortifications between Toretsk and Konstantinovka. Maybe there are several strongholds in this area that will be able to slow down the Russians, but when talking about Russian offensive between Vozdvizhenka and Konstantinovka, we believe that this territory wasn't prepared by the Ukrainians, and most likely if the Russians are able to cross several lines, the entire defense will collapse automatically. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, where the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours continued their counterattacks on the Russian positions. According to information we have, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions in the southeastern part of Kotlina. Today, the soldiers of the forces of the 425th Separate Battalion Skala published the video how they counterattacked and attacked the settlement of Kotlina from the southeast, and as a result of that counterattack they managed to establish a strong control over this part of the settlement. Furthermore, we got the video of ongoing Ukraine counterattacks between the city of Pokrovsk and Pishane. Today the Ukrainians made more attempts to restore control over lost positions along the railways. In this video that most likely took place several days ago, we can see how Ukrainian tank arrived in this area and was bombing and attacking the Russian positions in the vicinity of Pishane. In this video we can see another attempt. Most likely this is a very fresh video because currently there is a snow in this area. In this video we can see another attempt from the Ukrainian side to enter the settlement of Pishane from the city of Pokrovsk, but when the Ukrainians realized that they were discovered by the Russian FPV drone operators and artillerymen, the Ukrainians decided to turn back and to return back to the city of Pokrovsk, but most likely the Ukrainians haven't managed to finish this and they were destroyed. So we don't know for sure whether we need to change the map in this area, but most likely the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the railways. So as you can see, Ukrainians, while the Russians trying to move in the direction of the Dnipro region, try to counterattack the Russians from behind, trying to slow them down. As for the Dnipro region, during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their positions. We have adjusted the map in Russian favor on the village and the territory of the village of Sribne. In this video published by the Ukrainian side, we can see Ukrainian drone flying above the Russian soldiers that were clearing the settlement. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. This territory used to be considered as a gray zone or contested area. Now we have no doubts that the southern part of the village is under complete Russian control. Furthermore, as you can see, the Russians managed to establish complete FPV drone control over the western part of the settlement of Zaporizhia. Now the Ukrainians have no chances to bring forces in this part of the settlement. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of videos of how the Ukrainians were trying to bring additional reinforcements and reserves in the western part of this village of Zaporizhia, but everything that came there was discovered by the Russians and destroyed. Some of the vehicles were destroyed when they were moving just in this direction. So all this, summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to hold their lines for a very long time in the area of Zaporozhye, and after several attacks the Ukrainians most likely would be forced to fall back further in the western direction towards the settlement of Troitska. So as you can see, the Russian offensive is gaining momentum here, and it's getting closer and closer to the border with Dnipro, and something tells me that at some point the Ukrainians will start sending everything they can exactly in this direction, with the purpose not to allow the Russians to enter the Dnipro region, because this is going to be a media failure for Ukraine, and this is going to be like a final point that can force Trump to change his mind regarding Ukraine, regarding Putin, and regarding promises of Zelensky that he will give everything to the United States of America. We're talking about rare metals. As for the Andreevka fortified area, the most important updates are coming from the Andreevka itself. According to information we have, the Russians managed to take under control a few more buildings and streets in the most eastern part of the settlement, and according to information we have, most likely this upcoming night between the 5th and the 6th of February, the Russians will establish complete control over the settlement of Dachne, because now the main clashes are taking place exactly for the western part of the village, of the town, and most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to hold their line. Different pro-Russian resources have already reported that by the end of the 5th of February, the settlement of Dachne was taken by the Russians completely, and now the battle for the next settlement has begun. We're talking about, first of all, about the company's stronghold to the east of Ulakli, and then we're going to talk about the settlement of Ulakli itself. As for the next target, the Russians most likely will try to maintain the lines and to take everything in this pocket until this red line, and then the battle for Andreevka, Constantinople, Ulakli triangle will begin. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.